America and the United States, helping them effectively deal with an important part of the dental practice. Certainly one of the most expensive parts of running a dental and operating a successful dental practice. And really the purpose of today's program or webinar is to dig into the components of a dental practice and understand it a little bit better. Whether you're starting up a new practice, you have an upcoming renewal, you have an existing practice, or you're looking to expand your dental practice or potentially relocate or open up a second practice, we'll really talk about the importance of the dental office lease as it relates to the business of dentistry. We'll also touch on, for those of you who are building owners, and really look and understand how carefully and better you can structure your relationship between your building and practice, and today's program will give you a little bit of insight on how to best do so. I thought it'd be a good idea also to give you a little bit of background on myself. From a very young age, I was exposed to commercial real estate through my family's portfolio. I had gotten the experience to really touch base with a lot of landlords and tenants, and as I went through that process, I really found that there was a unique gap between the dental community as well as the healthcare community, and really was exposed to a lot of the nuances of the dental community throughout my tenure working with my family. Very shortly after, I was recruited by Cirrus Consulting Group to join the firm to really represent the dental community as best as possible. And we'll get into a little bit about how valued a tenant you as a dental professional are, and how we can best support the community moving forward. Wanted to also give you a little bit of background about Cirrus Consulting Group. We're very happy to say that we're celebrating our 25th year anniversary. We were founded in 1994 by dentists for dentists, really to support the dental community. To date, we've negotiated over 10,000 dental and medical office leases. And the way our firm is constructed is in a very unique manner. And I'll give you a little bit of insight on that. We run various courses, CE courses, like you're joining us today. We also do live CE courses across the country. As well as we also are attending a lot of the major dental conventions. You can see we've been to the Greater New York Dental Convention, the Pacific Dental Convention, the Yankee, California Dental Association. Really work nationwide with as many dentists as possible. But the uniqueness of our firm is really how we're constructed. We have an in-house legal team who really focus on the legal aspects of the dental office lease. And we have a leasing team and a consulting team who really look at rental rates, market rental rates within the area, and really get a good understanding of what is going on within that specific community. And we do, like I mentioned, dental leases across North America, but have a great understanding of what's going on in the area in terms of redevelopment, rental rates, and it's something that is very unique because we do keep everything in-house. We also have the consulting team, which I'm a part of, who really go from coast to coast to educate dental tenants and dentists on how they're unique and how we can better structure their dental offices. Going through a couple of the major metropolitan areas throughout North America, and you'll notice a trend here of simply supply and demand. Rental rates are going up as supply for dental practices are going down. So looking here at New York City, we're looking at rental rates of over $63 a square foot, and rental rates dropping at a very drastic rate. We see it at about just under 6.8% of vacancies throughout New York City. Looking at Austin, one of the hotbed markets of the United States, again, we're very much increasing in rental rates, again, with very limited supply. Same with Chicago. Metropolitan Chicago constantly climbing up with rental rates going down. San Francisco, arguably the hottest market in North America, where we've seen a climb over the last 5 to 10 years of just skyrocketing rental rates, as well as you can see, very, very low opportunity for finding space in San Francisco. So the purpose of today's webinar is really to get a good understanding of the importance of a lease and what it can do for you in your current situation, in your future situation, and really it's the foundation of your practice. We'll talk about some key terms and conditions within your lease that we find in over 70 to 90% of leases, and really give you some practical advice on what best way to go about that. Moving forward, whether it's opening up a new practice, renegotiating your upcoming lease, but really give you some tangible way to really help yourself as you move forward within your career with a dental practice. So a lot of the times, I'm on multiple calls a day with dentists across North America, and they always ask me the question, should I buy or should I lease? And it's always a hard question to answer because it's unique to the person. But what I can say is on the leasing side, it requires a lot of small upfront payments. There's not as much capital to invest into the space. You don't have to obviously purchase the building and then also build out the practice. So it's really a matter of cash flow. Greater working capital towards building out the practice can something, we work with Henry Schein in Canada and the United States and really find that it could cost anywhere from $150 to $200 a square foot to build out a practice. So when you're looking at buying versus leasing, that's quite the investment on top of purchasing the building. Leasing, you do have the flexibility of relocating, renovating, expanding if you so wish. Whereas buying, you're really stuck into the space. You're obviously heavily invested more into the space when you're buying. But also a lot of the time, what dentists don't realize is you're assuming almost a second job. If there's other multiple tenants in the building, for instance, I'm working with a doctor right now in New York City where his neighbor, who happened to be a Starbucks, knocked on his door and said, plumbing isn't working. I need to fix it. So it's really a matter of how much time you're willing to invest in and how much you want to be a landlord, because it's not an easy, and I can tell you from firsthand experience from my past experience with my family, is that it's quite a lot of work to be a landlord. And it can be time consuming. So when traveling from coast to coast, there's one question that I love to ask, and I get a various number of answers when I ask this question: what is a lease? And simply put, it's a check. It's a check, and I would argue that it is the biggest check you will write in your personal or professional life. Dentistry is probably the most expensive business to get into, and we see that on average throughout the country that you're investing over $1.4 million of rent throughout the lifespan of a lease. And I can assure you that if you had known that you were going to spend over $1.4 million on average throughout the duration of your dental career, you would have read your lease from page to page, sentence by sentence, word for word, paragraph by paragraph, to ensure that every legal clause, every financial clause was perfect and made you have the ability to transfer your lease, to sell your practice, and we'll get into a lot of those details later, but really be able to set you up for your future with a smooth career on what we see over 26 years on average. A lot of the time when dentists are purchasing their first practice or moving into their first practice, they're really focused on rent, common area maintenance fees, square footage, and there's a lot more that goes into that in terms of legalities, financials, making sure that we're paying fair market rental rates. But I really want to also focus on the legal side as well. And the uniqueness of the dental tenant and how you can leverage this 26 years of, on average, of spending time in a dental practice, and how unique and valuable that is, and how much leverage that gives you in order to be the best dental tenant throughout your duration of your career. So why is the lease, or why is the office lease so important? It's your location. It's your foundation of your practice. What happens if you were to get 30-day notice? I'm dealing with a doctor right now who has a 30-day notice period where they can terminate her lease. What happens to your patients? What happens to your staff? Really, as a dental tenant, you're a pillar in the community. People rely on you for dental advice, dental procedures, and if you're not open and you're not available and you don't have your space, what happens? If you had and I pose a question to you, what would you do if you had a 30-day relocation clause or 30-day notice termination clause in your lease? It would be detrimental to your practice. The investment into the space, like I mentioned earlier, we work with Henry Schein very closely. They mentioned it costs anywhere from $150 to $200 a square foot to build out a dental practice. You need the ADA and healthcare approval. Plumbing is very expensive. It's not a Starbucks. It's not a Subway sandwich shop. There's very specific plumbing that you need, as you know, to go into the dental space. Same with electrical. Same with staffing. So again, one of the biggest, most expensive businesses to start up is the business of dentistry. And then very expensive and time-consuming to move. We see, like I mentioned, $150 to $200 a square foot to build out a dental practice. Imagine if you had to pick up after 2 or 3 years being in the space and having to relocate. Typically, we see about 18 months it takes to relocate a dental practice, from conception to zoning to permits. So not only is it very expensive, it's time-consuming. And that 18 months, we see that, on every month that passes, we see on average 8.6 patient attrition loss. So not only are we, not working and we're focused on building out the practice, but we're losing patients as well. So something also to consider when the importance of a lease. And the practice, the sale of the practice. A lot of the time, and we'll get to some of this language later, but in most, I would say in almost 80+% of leases, you need consent in order to transfer the lease and sell the practice. Something certainly we'll need to amend and address, but something that's very concerning that, after your 26+ career, having the landlord say you're unable to sell the practice, you need my consent in order to do so. Something, again, that could be extremely detrimental to the practice. So what are the 3 components of your practice? The 3 sellable components to your practice. One is equipment. 2 is goodwill, the patience. And I would argue that the most important is the lease. Again, it's the foundation of your practice. It's the foundation of what you are allowed and what you aren't allowed to practice in the space, what you need in order to sell this practice. It's extremely important that the lease is well structured. And again, we'll get into a little more detail, some practical cases that we see on a daily basis in order for the landlord to withhold consent or not be able to let you sell or transition out of the practice. So what should your lease do for you? It should have fair and affordable financial terms. It should give you the right to audit CAM, many overpaying CAM fees. I'm dealing with a client right now in Syracuse, New York, where the landlord is charging almost double the amount, the average area for snow removal. After looking into it, after we were retained, after looking into more detail, he had hired his brother-in-law for snow removal services and was overcharging for that snow removal service, and was funneling that through common area maintenance fees. So very important to be able to have audit rights and making sure that everything in terms of common area maintenance fees, whether it's landscaping, whether it's snow removal and everything in between, that it's important that we're making sure that everything is kosher, for lack of a better word. And then the long-term stability and security. We advise that every doctor or most doctors, when we sign a lease, should have a 10-year term with 2 5-year options, and making sure that those 2 5-year options are transferable. And the uniqueness of the business of dentistry is, you know, we're in the space for long term. We build out the space. We invest heavily in the space. We have to use that as leverage to and take advantage of our long-term tenure within that space. Landlords love it when we come up to them and say, Mr. Landlord, we want to plan on staying here for 20 plus years. That gives them predictability and gives us leverage in order to make sure that we have favorable terms within the lease. And it also gives us better position to sell the practice. We work with RBC and Bank of America, and they've let us know that in order for any bank to finance any incoming doctor, they need to see at least 5 years minimum of term on the lease. And if not, no bank will finance that incoming doctor, and you could lose this potential sale or potential doctor to sell that practice to. So certainly something that we want to make sure is protected. Minimizing risk and exposures. We want to make sure that personally we don't have any exposures. I'm dealing with a client right now who had a personal guarantee towards his lease, an ongoing liability towards his lease, and when he sold his practice to his new associate who had taken over the practice, doctor retired to Miami, Florida, was enjoying his retirement. Unfortunately, what happened was his associate that he sold his practice to, who he had given a personal and ongoing liability to, or had an ongoing liability, the doctor who had purchased the practice was in default of the lease. He made some poor business decisions, and the landlord had called the doctor who sold him the practice in Miami, Florida, and simply said, you are on the hook for the remaining 7 years of the lease, as your associate who you sold the practice to made some poor business decisions. And I pose the question to you, what would you do? No CE credits, you haven't been practicing for over a couple years, you're enjoying your retirement, and now all of a sudden you have to come back to return to practice. Certainly something that we want to limit. And then enhancing your ability to eventually sell your practice. We want to make sure that the practice is an asset, not a liability. There's many clauses that we see on a daily basis that, as advising a doctor to purchase that practice, we would say, no, you shouldn't buy that practice. There's too many liabilities. There's too many risks. It's not worth the investment. Versus making sure that all these legal terms and terminologies are cleaned up in order for it to be made an asset. We want to make sure that at the peak of our career and towards the end of our career, we want to make sure that our lease is an asset and making sure that we can capitalize on that asset as soon as we start to begin the process of selling that practice. So what's in your lease? Many things. We'll start off with the option of renew, and I'll give you about 5 or so minutes to just read through this and see if you can figure out some of the major issues we find in this lease, and I'll jump back on in a couple minutes. So we'll start with the first sentence. Provided that Dr. Joe Black shall remain as the tenant. So as you see, the option to renew is personal to Dr. Joe Black. And like I mentioned to you earlier when we spoke with Bank of America and RBC, impossible for them to finance an incoming doctor if there's not term on the lease. A lot of the time doctors will come up to us and say, Noah, I'm ready to sell my practice. I'm ready to move to Italy to retire. And how many times that this line will prohibit them from being able to transfer the lease. Because they realize that instead of having 2 years remaining on their 10-year term plus the 5-year option, that really the 5-year option is only is personal to Dr. Joe Black. So certainly something that, when we're upcoming for negotiation or we're starting up a new practice, we want to make sure that all options are transferable and that we can sell the practice based on that. Second, and if the tenant duly and has regularly paid its rent and has performed its covenants and obligations under this lease and has not been in default. Landlord has tried to renew to you being in good standing and not in default. Like I mentioned earlier, some leases can be upwards of 60 pages. And just because you're in a rush to pick up your daughter to go to dance, and you leave the garbage next to your front door, you could technically be in default. We see on average that, through a 10-year career, on average 10 years, doctors will be in default 3 to 4 times throughout that 10-year career, whether it's garbage, whether it could be for any number of reasons. But just because, we might think that it's just being late on rent or not paying rent, landlord can use this as leverage to, put you in default to lease and be able to transfer and to get themselves out of the lease and find a new tenant. Moving forward, by written notice, to the landlord no less than 9 months prior to the end of the term. So I pose the question again to you. How many of you are keeping track of these option to renew dates? A lot of the time we'll keep track of, okay, my lease expires in December 2020, but a lot of the time it's really not that. It's anywhere from 180 days to even a year prior to advance that we do have to give notice in order for them to express the lease and our willingness to want to stay in the space. Any such renewal shall be on the landlord's then current standard form lease. So we could come in, we could get you the best possible lease, we could get all the favorable terms, all the favorable rental rates, but when it comes to the next upcoming renewal, landlord has the option to switch you back to a standard form lease, which could have terms that are unfavorable towards the dentist. So really want to make sure that language like this is really not in an option to renew or not in the lease to begin with. In no event shall it be less than the rent paid in the last years of the original term. So example, 2008, market crashes. We'll go with Miami, Florida, or Florida as a state as a whole, where we're working with dentists who signed leases at the height of the market, just before 2008. And when 2008 hit, market crashed, rental rates went to an all-time low. But according to this lease, there's no way that you will be able to decrease in rent. You only can increase. So we want to make sure that we're protected based on market conditions and what's going on in the area. And then last but certainly not least, based on the market rent for renewing tenants in the building. And again, that just talks about the rental rates not being able to go up and not being able to go down. We want to make sure that we're within the market rental rate and we have mechanisms within the lease to make sure that we're on point on that. So again, some major issues when it comes to options renew and something that we see in over 90% of leases. Certainly something that we want to be aware of. Assignment. So the assignment is really your ability to transfer the lease, to sell the practice, and what it entails in order to do so. So I'll give you another quick minute or two just to read quickly and see if you can point out any of the major glaring issues within this. So first and foremost, you'll see here towards the yellow highlighted, it shall first have received the consent of the landlord. So what that means is simple. You need consent from the landlord in order to sell your practice. My definition of consent, and any of your definitions of consent, we can get 5 to 10 to 15 different definitions of consent. Very vague, very up for interpretation, and a lot of the time landlords use this in order to derive some sort of benefit from you to transfer the lease, whether it's financial, most of the time financial, but certainly something that can be detrimental to the ability to sell and transfer your lease. Moving forward, the landlord shall have the option to 1, approve the tenant's request to assign the lease or sublet the premise. Perfect. 2, decline the tenant's request to assign the lease or sublet the premise. And or 3, to terminate the lease agreement upon the effective date of the such proposed lease agreement or assignment or sublet. So simply for asking, Mr. Landlord, I want to transfer my lease to Dr. Smith. Well, I appreciate you asking, and I thank you for asking, but because you asked, I have the right to terminate your lease. it's terrible language, and we see this in over 75% of the leases. Next, we have the landlord shall have the right to revise a minimum rent to be paid during the remainder of the term of the greater or than current market rental rate, so the lease premise are 15% greater than the current rental rate. Meaning landlord, just for consenting and saying, yes, I will approve the lease, they can increase the rent by 15%. So put yourself in that incoming doctor's shoes and say, okay, we'll have a deal, we settle on financial to transfer the lease. Oh, by the way, your rental rates are going up by 15% in order for me to transfer this lease to you. I'm pretty sure most of you would run and not even walk away from a deal like this. Certainly something that really, again, puts leverage in the landlord's shoes when, throughout our tenure in the space or even our dental career, we've worked hard to build up a successful practice. And to have a deal fall short because of an increase in rent upon assignment is something that, again, could be detrimental to the transfer of the lease. Furthermore, should tenant receive from the assignee or sublet any rental income, cash goods, or any form of consideration in connection with the assignment of this lease or sublet or the premise that is over and above the current base rental rates payable to the landlord in any fiscal year during the term of this lease, the difference between the annual rental rate and such rental income, cash, goods, or consideration shall be paid to the landlord directly within 30 days of the tenant's receipt of thereof. What does this mean? You pay, let's say, $200,000 a year in rent. You sell your practice for $1 million. According to this part of the assignment clause, you are obligated to pay the landlord that $800,000, the difference between the million and the $200,000, to the landlord within 30 days. Incredible. You worked so hard for your entire career to build up this practice. Now all of a sudden, the landlord will say, well, it's my space. You made money. You built up the practice because of my space and my location. I want that consideration. I want that $800,000. Detrimental, once again, and totally unreasonable to ask for something like that. And then last but certainly not least, notwithstanding the landlord's consent to any assignment or sublet, the tenant shall not be released from its ongoing and under this lease and shall remain liable for any future or failure of the tenant or its assignees or subtenants to observe each and every covenant of the lease. So like I mentioned a bit earlier about the story of the doctor who retired in Florida, that you are personally liable for the new incoming doctor. They're making sure, it's what we call the deep wealth theory. Landlord wants to get their hands in as many pockets as humanly possible in order to ensure that, whatever the next upcoming term is or the next upcoming negotiation for that new incoming doctor, that the previous doctor is liable to make sure that, they're covering the rents if for some reason that doctor would default. Very much, in terms of this whole section, very much written like a nail salon, Subway sandwich shop, law firm, accounting firm. Again, we talked about this a bit earlier and discussed this a bit earlier, but dentistry and the ability for you to be loyal within the space and really be a true unique tenant that's long-term, heavily invested in the space, again, 75% of this language is written in dental office leases, but is by no means unique to the business of dentistry, and we need to make sure that it's very dental specific. A couple other traps that we find in dental office lease. I know we discussed the assignment, but demolition, there's a lot of redevelopment throughout North America and a lot of the major cities. We find a lot. The relocation clause. I was dealing with a doctor in Toronto, Ontario, just a couple days ago. She had taken over a practice, and in the assignment language, they had a relocation clause, that they had the ability to relocate the dental tenant throughout anywhere in the space within 30 days. That doctor had invested over $3 to $4 million into the space between buying the practice and building it out, and within 30 days of her moving in, they had the ability to relocate her. Crazy. Uniqueness to our firm is the death and disability clause, really making sure that that's dental specific. In terms of the disability, back pain, carpal tunnel, back pain, really unique to the dental community, and something that we're very proud of to have introduced that over 25 years ago. Personal guarantees, operating costs, we touched on that as well. Just really a lot, exclusivity, compliance, termination rights, financial statements, making sure, again, that landlord isn't funneling these crazy costs that, could be double the amount that normally is in the area, and having the ability to get financial statements from them and even auditing those financial statements on a yearly basis. So these are just some of the many traps that we find in the office lease that can be very much detrimental to the office, to your career moving forward. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of how we operate, we always recommend that it's best to begin negotiations 24 months prior to whether it's that renewal date or that date where you have to express your option. So it's critical to understand, like we mentioned, it could take anywhere from 12 to 18 months to relocate a dental practice. So landlords know once it gets into that 8 months to less than 8 months period, it's virtually impossible for you to be able to relocate, find a new practice, build it out, go through that whole long process, that they'll know that you won't move, and they'll leverage that in a way to give you unfavorable terms within the lease, unfavorable rental rates, because they know that you have really no ability to move, because your practice will be closed, whether it's because of relocation, build out, whatever it might be. So really best to touch base, get a hold of us, go through the lease, point out a number of glaring issues that we would find with the lease, and start really touching base with the landlord 24 months prior to that date. So very important and critical that we know our dates and making sure that we're tracking those dates, and really have a concrete plan in order to how to reach out to the landlord. So due to you enrolling and attending our program this afternoon, we wanted to, as a firm, offer you a critical dates and risk analysis assessment. Typically, we charge $1,500 for the service, but we wanted to offer that as a complimentary to you guys today. What this risk analysis and critical dates assessment really entails is anywhere from 3 to 4 hours of analyzing your lease and some of those traps that we had discussed as well. And be able to relay that information and point out some glaring issues within your lease. So we would go ahead and schedule a consultation call and go through the lease and get a better understanding of your vision, your practice, because each lease is unique to the dental tenant. It's based around your trajectory of your career, when you'd like to retire, if you'd like to open multiple practices. So really get a good understanding of your unique situation and build, a treatment plan for yourself, and really get a good understanding of what your goals are, what your wants are, what your needs are, what your issues are with your current space, and really develop a treatment plan, like I said, in order to create the best possible outcome and really make the lease an asset and not a liability. So like I mentioned, we wanted to invite you all to this complimentary consultation service. If you are interested, it is a first come, first serve. We do have limited amounts, I would say about 5 complimentary lease reviews that we can extend to each of you in attendance today. So it is a first come, first serve basis. My contact information is here as well. We will have a number of our representatives reaching out for those who have requested a complimentary review. And again, I want to thank you all for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed the webinar this afternoon. Take care and hope you have a great rest of your day.